Good afternoon, everybody. Distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Mr. Luis Trevino, excuse me, I'm just trying to practice the pronunciation, Senior Urban Development Specialist at the World Bank, Professor Tsukuda, Professor Iuchi. It is my great honor to welcome you to the 25th Disaster Risk Management Seminar organized by the World Bank Tokyo Disaster Risk Management Hub. We are facing increasing challenges posed by natural disasters on a global scale. Last year, natural disasters caused unprecedented global economic losses amounting to $368 billion. Sudden onset events such as earthquakes, floods, and cyclones displaced an average of 13.9 million people on an annual basis. The impact on the residential structures has been particularly severe, accounting for approximately 50% of total monetary losses. This makes today's topic, Resilient Housing Reconstruction for a Changing World, Global Lessons and Japanese Innovations, both timely and highly relevant. The World Bank has been at the forefront of supporting post-disaster and post-conflict housing recovery for over 40 years. A recent review of over 80 post-disaster housing recovery projects by the World Bank, which will be presented later, I guess, highlights the need to redefine success in housing recovery. You will learn the importance of strengthening housing resilience capacity before, during, and after disasters from the presentation to come. Japan, with a long history of dealing with large-scale disasters, has enhanced its institutional frameworks and implementation mechanism for housing recovery. Our approach includes stringent building codes, multi-stakeholder collaboration, which obviously includes private and the public partnership, and a strong emphasis on community-driven recovery. Such Japan's experiences offer valuable lessons for other countries who are seeking to strengthen disaster resilience in the housing sector. I understand that the Tokyo Disaster Risk Management Hub is currently creating a report on such Japan's housing reconstruction case studies. The Japan's Ministry of Finance, which I represent, prioritizes disaster risk management as one of the key development agendas, and as such is actively working to apply our experience and our expertise in this area across the globe. As such, we are proud to support the Japan World Bank program for mainstreaming disaster risk management in developing countries. This program's support includes resilient housing agendas as well, providing timely access to housing and shelter in disaster-affected countries in many countries, including Pakistan, Turkey, and Maldives, to name a few. Let's reaffirm our commitment to building resilient housing that can withstand the immense challenges in front of us. Japan stands ready to share its knowledge and experience, working in close partnership with the World Bank and other nations to create a safer and more resilient future for all. Before I close, taking this opportunity, I'd like to invite one person who is Ms. Mika Iwasaki. Iwasaki-san, please stand up. She's the person who has championed disaster risk management and playing a critical role to bridge Japanese experience and expertise with the World Bank and the rest of the world. And her professionalism, commitment, and also passion has been inspirational to all of us. And I personally really appreciate your dedication and great effort. And she'll be retiring, which is a great sad news for all of us. But I heard from Mika-san that the successor as TTL, the task team leader, of Disaster Risk Management Hub will be Keiko-san. So this is a great continuity within the Tokyo Disaster Risk Management Hub. So I really want to say the words of appreciation once again, and also wish you all the best for your future endeavor. Thank you very much. With that, I close my opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tsuda, for your very insightful and also very emotional remarks. So next, I would like to introduce the first presenter, Mr. Luis Trevino from the World Bank. So Luis, he will talk about the housing policy for the new paradigm, lessons learned from the World Bank Disaster Recovery Project from the fiscal year 1980 to 2024. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Luis Trevino from the World Bank.
So, good afternoon, and thank you for the warm welcome, Hiro. It's an honor to be here in Japan, a country whose history, institutions, and value continue to shape the future of resilience all over the world. Few countries have endured as much, responded as decisively, or rebuilt as wisely as Japan. From the great Hanshin-Awaji earthquake in Kobe to the triple disaster in Tohoku, Japan has shown that housing recovery is not just about the physical structure of the buildings. It's about trust, it's about people, about speed with dignity, and above all, it's about preparedness, how quickly and effectively systems can respond when lives are disrupted. So it's not coincidence that we are here today. We are here because Japan understands what it means to lead on this issue, and I want to personally say that I have long admired Japan's leadership, generosity, and example. Now, as we reflect on this challenge, it's worth remembering something else. The World Bank itself was born from crisis. We were established in the aftermath of World War II as a reconstruction institution. So rebuilding homes, economies, and institutions was not a side mission. It was actually our founding purpose. And as today we face this global crisis of unprecedented scale, that original mission is more relevant than ever. So today we are going to talk about what the World Bank has learned from 45 years of housing reconstruction projects and housing publications. So it's about where we stand and where we could go next, or where we must go next. But it's also about something deeper. No, it's about the systems, the readiness that must exist long before the earth shakes, the storm hits, or the waters rise. Because the truth is that just like you don't build in airbags before the car crash, resilience must be built in before the disaster. And to build in before, it must be built together, with purpose, with urgency, and with the right partners. And few partnerships are more vital for the future of resilience in the world than the partnership between Japan and the World Bank. So let's take a clear look at the challenge. So today, over 100 million people live without secure housing. It's 1 in 4 people around the world live in conditions that are harmful to their health, to their safety, and to their ability to thrive. By 2030, over 3 billion people, so nearly 40% of the world's population, will require adequate, affordable, and resilient housing. And this is not just, a statistic or a theoretical statement. It is a lived daily reality for hundreds of millions of families all over the world. And every year, this number grows, not just because of population growth, but because of disaster risk, climate exposure, and inequality. More than 1 billion people are now at risk of having their homes and lives upended by disasters. Now, housing is where development, disaster, and dignity collide. And when a crisis hits, housing is usually the first to fall and the last to be rebuilt. So in many disasters, 80 to 90% of affected buildings are homes, and housing accounts for roughly half of the total economic losses. As it was mentioned before, in 2024 alone, disaster cost 320 billion in losses. Less than 140 of these losses were insured. That makes the third costliest year for insured disaster losses since 1980. Now, of course, the real toll of this is on families, on social cohesion, on recovery, which is even deeper. No? As I said before, homes are not just the physical structure, they are the center of family, of education, of mental health, of economic activity. And in many developing countries, they are also the most significant, often the only asset households own. So when a home is lost, it's not just the structure that disappears, it's safety, it's savings that goes away, it's continuity. So disasters don't just destroy these buildings, they disrupt identity, erase the neighborhood ties, and set families back decades. So now, if there's a country that understands how this works, this truth in numbers, but in lived experience, is Japan. As it was mentioned before, Japan has lived through these devastating disasters, but it has somehow shown the world how to put people and the social fabric at the center of recovery. So through institutions, through inclusive planning, through resilient housing capacity, Japan has built more than structures. It has built trust, it has built preparedness and dignity into the way housing recovery is done. As fast as possible to as many people as possible. I love that message shown in one government office in Japan. So it's simple, it's human, and it's true. And the world needs a little bit more of that spirit, no? So at the World Bank, we have been supporting housing for decades. In the last 45 years, the World Bank has conducted more than 270 projects, 83 housing projects, 83 of them focus specifically on housing reconstruction. As you can see in this map, these 83 projects were implemented in 38 countries, with a larger concentration in Latin America and the Caribbean and South Asia, but essentially they are, as you can see, all over the world. In that same time span, the World Bank published more than 340 studies on housing. Now, over the last few years, we realized we needed to take a hard look at what we had achieved and where we needed to do better. So we undertook two major reviews, each one designed to tell us something different, but both of them were deeply interconnected. We asked ourselves, are we learning fast enough? So the first review of 83 projects that were specifically focused on post-disaster housing reconstruction. So that's, just to put it in perspective, that's nearly 1/3 of everything we do in housing sector at the World Bank is focused on helping countries recover from catastrophe. So what did we learn? So we saw impressive results. Original targets were almost fully met. But we also saw that the challenge of the new climate normal is increasingly impacting project performance. We concluded that a country's capacity to deliver housing solutions to everyone, everywhere, matters more than anything else. Essentially, we confirmed what Japan had learned decades ago, the need to develop this capacity to help as many as possible, as fast as possible, after a disaster strikes. Now, let me walk you through how we arrived to this conclusion. We found that there is a need for stronger alignment with what beneficiaries need, which is speed, quality, and affordability, and what projects define as success. In terms of speed, we found that housing reconstruction projects took on average more than 3 years from the day of the disaster to the delivery of the first housing solution, housing units. No? And delivery timelines are getting longer for a variety of reasons, including stricter standards and a higher number of projects in countries with smaller and less developed housing markets. In terms of quality, the result framework of closed projects did not usually include indicators such as the satisfaction of beneficiary, the resilience of the housing solutions provided, or even the occupancy rate of the houses that were produced. This, of course, doesn't mean that the projects didn't work on this or didn't pay attention to this particular topic. It just means that the projects didn't measure them. In terms of affordability, we found that the average cost per housing solution has increased. The reason behind this increase is the reasons are similar to those related to the longer delivery timelines or stricter standards, higher concentration in smaller and less developed housing markets. Now, perhaps the only reason that needs to be added is that with stronger severity of disaster, it is only natural that overage costs increase because you don't only need to retrofit, the intensity of the disaster is so strong that you need to build new again. Now, there is one more aspect that deserves attention. The universe of countries requesting housing reconstruction projects is expanding. And before, we used to have the projects concentrated largely in the top 30 riskiest countries in the world. Now this has changed to 38.5. Essentially, more countries that we did not expect are now requesting housing reconstruction support. And because they are coming up and we didn't anticipate that, we probably were not providing support before that event, right? So that it means that essentially this new climate normal, more countries will need from Japan and more countries will need from the World Bank support as well. So this gives me to the main conclusion of this review of housing reconstruction projects. So just as was Japan's journey on resilient housing capacity shows, the capacity to respond to a disaster as fast as possible, reaching as many as possible, is critical. And what is most important is this capacity cannot be built overnight. It's a capacity that has to be built over time. Therefore, the only way to improve the performance of the World Bank housing reconstruction projects is actually to make resilience a core element in all housing projects at the bank. So during the remaining part of this presentation, I would like to share with you how we propose to make this happen. Now, this review of housing reconstruction projects is just half of the story. The second review look at the analytical work. And the logic here is that if you want better investments, you need better ideas to guide these investments, right? So we review over 340 publications. So that's the full landscape of what the World Bank has produced on housing in the last 45 years. And from this, we narrow down to 65 comprehensive national housing assessments. So these are the most complete in-depth diagnostic reports available. Now, the purpose of these documents is typically to help countries and back teams understand housing needs, identify policy gaps, and improve decision-making. The logic there is quite simple because, strong analysis should shape strong projects, and what we wanted to test whether that was actually happening or not. So together, these two reviews, the projects and the assessments, tell us in a way how we have worked, how we have learned, and how we have delivered. Now, something stands very clear, and it's that the World Bank is a global leader when it comes to resilient housing at the project, at the analytical level. When it comes to analytical work, no institution has done more, produced more, or gone deeper. And compares to peer institutions, we are talking about multilateral development banks or other UN agencies, our work covers housing challenges more holistically. And when it comes to resilience, our work also outperforms peer institutions. And the quality is rising both in medium and high-risk countries. And of course, particularly after the creation of the FDRR in 2006, you see a stronger impact on that as well. In this review of 65 national housing assessments, in addition to this upward trend, we found 8 reports that stood out as what we call the gold standard. So these were reports that combined sound policy analysis with attention to resilience, affordability, delivery mechanisms, and implementation strategies. So they were the kind of assessments that not only diagnosed problems, but also gave countries a roadmap. Now, how could we interpret these findings? So I was thinking before coming here, that Japan again provides an important lesson. So if you ask how Nissan or any Japanese company measures success, the answer isn't, we are growing, we should be doing fine. The real question is, how well are we performing relative to what we could perform? Or are we delivering at the level the moment demands? And so that's how we approach this review. It was not to sort of criticize what we have been doing, but to challenge ourselves, right? So since the world is asking more for us, what else can we do? So we ask ourselves whether we are delivering at the level the moment demands, and our answer was that while our performance was second to none, there was still room to improve. So our housing assessments, as our housing projects, need to make resilience a core element. So resilience cannot be treated as optional or as an afterthought. So how and where do we go from here? So at the World Bank, we ask ourselves a simple but important question. What if we stop thinking about resilience only in terms of materials, designs, or building codes? What if we thought of it as capacity? And that's how the idea of resilient housing capacity was born. This ability of institutions, systems, and stakeholders to deliver housing that can protect people, not just after a disaster, but before the disaster even strikes. So it's about readiness, it's about building better before, not just building back better. When we look at our strongest project and our most impactful analytical work, we saw a pattern. Success wasn't related to budget or even speed. It was about pre-existing housing markets and systems. So countries that had clear housing policies, well-coordinated institutions, reliable land administration, and access to pre-approved financing were the ones that moved faster and built safest. So that's what we mean by capacity. So it's not a theoretical concept, it's very practical, right? It means that ministries that have clear mandates, it means land that is secure, and finance that is flexible. It also means designing reconstruction programs to anticipate complexity, not just to react to it, no? And for families, it means a home to return to, a system that works, and a recovery that doesn't take years. So just what every one of us would like to have if it would happen to us. With this concept at hand, the next step is to sharpen our own tools. So our assessments become more forward-looking, more risk-informed, and more actionable. So this is why we are proposing as a benchmarking tool, the Resilient Housing Snapshot. This is a tool that can help identify gaps and guide intervention pathways. And it's envisioned as an analytical product that is faster than a full housing assessment, faster and cheaper. It's contextually grounded, enables comparability, and help project task team leaders rebuild faster after disasters. So where does it take us? So one of the clearest messages from all this work is simple but powerful. We need to shift or complement Build Back Better with Build Better Before. And don't get me wrong, Build Back Better has served us well. It brought attention to the need for smarter recovery. It challenged us to go beyond reconstruction and to think about resilience. But too often it implied that we must wait for the disaster to act. And in a world of growing risk where storms are stronger, droughts are longer, and earthquakes are more damaging, resilience cannot be reactive, right? Resilience has to be preemptive. And that's what Build Better Before is about. It means putting housing at the center of preparedness, not just at the center of recovery. And it means securing land rights before displacement happens, not trying to resolve these land issues afterwards. It means designing reconstruction programs now so they are ready to deploy in 7 days, not in 7 months. And it means training local governments, building information systems, testing delivery chains, and pre-positioning finance, all where before a crisis hits. And it also means rethinking timelines, because too often we measure success in years, but disasters unfold in hours. So what we are proposing, of course, is not just a slogan, it is a policy goal. Now, we think across countries and crises, when resilient housing capacity is in place, when systems are prepared, standards are clear, financing is flexible, recovery happens faster, and recovery happens fairer. But when those capacities are missing, even the best intentioned projects stall. And this is why resilient housing capacity needs to be understood as a pillar of development. not just a post-disaster fix, but as part of how countries build climate adaptation, economic inclusion, and long-term stability. Our president, Ajay Banga, has said something that has stayed with us throughout this world, that the world is not waiting. It's not waiting for perfect conditions, and it's not waiting for us to catch up. So the main logic we have this work is that we shouldn't wait either. So this work on resilient housing capacity is part of this World Bank broader commitment to becoming a better bank, not just bigger, not just faster, but better. And that means listening more closely to countries. It means improving what we finance, but not only that, it means improving how we assess, design, and deliver our projects. And of course, it means to be open to review, right? Not out of criticism, but out of the desire to grow, to get better. Because progress requires reflection, and progress requires leadership. And we are serious about helping countries managing risks. We must start with ourselves, right? And that's why we look at this portfolio of these two projects and analytical work. And that's why we are sharing this work, right? Not as a final work, but as a conversation starter, not to point fingers, but to lift standards. So to raise a bar for what good housing and preparedness can look like. Now, also, it's important that, particularly in housing reconstruction, it's important to recognize that leadership isn't about never making mistakes. It's about actually learning from them, and systematically, transparently, and with purpose. And that's something that Japan has done for decades, and we're gonna hear about today. It's not just a story of lots of successes. It's a chain of successes, failures, and learning and improving, right? So if there's a country that understands what it means to turn disaster into reform, or to turn loss into learning, or trauma into transformation, that's Japan, right? And so here you can see some of the fastest, most inclusive housing recovery systems in the world. And you can also see the trust in the institutions, right? Where people, families, and communities are at the center, where reconstruction is done with speed, scale, and social cohesion. And this is actually the reason why Japan's experience is so relevant for the rest of the world. Because Japan has so much to share on this. It had done so much already. And because the world needs a little bit more of this leadership on policy, on preparedness, and on the principles that make recovery not only faster, but fairer for those that need it the most. The next crisis will come, and we cannot stop it. So it is certain we are going to have bigger and worse disasters. But if we get this done right, and this is our thinking at the resilient housing team at the bank, if we get this right, if we invest now in systems, in people, and policies that work, then the next crisis won't break the system. It will actually reveal its own strengths. So this is the message I wanted to give you today. I'm looking forward to the conversation to learn more about Japan. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Grace, for your very comprehensive presentation. You need some water. Yeah, so Luis talks about the history, the past 45 years of the housing project in the World Bank. So now next, I would like to introduce the Professor Maki Norio from the Kyoto University, who will share lessons from decades of housing reconstruction in Japan. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. My title is The Decade, but I will talk a century of the housing recovery history of history, not centuries, a century of the housing recovery in Japan. And let me start about explaining that the concept. It means that how I understand that the housing recovery. And it starts from the emergency shelter. Usually for the shelters after disaster, they usually use those kinds of the facility. And in the developing country, the quality of the housing is not, according to Luis, nowadays it costs more than $30,000, very expensive. But the other countries, the cost of the housing is not so expensive and easy to reconstruct. So they usually from emergency shelter to permanent housing. It's a very primitive way of the housing recovery. But growing the economy, with the growing the economy of the growing of the resilience of the housing, the cost of the housing, and according to Louis' presentation, it takes 50 months to have a new housing home. So we cannot live in those kind of places for 50 months. So we will have interim housing or temporary housing as a process of the housing recovery. So that the countries moving from this two-step recovery frame to a three-step recovery frames. And then nowadays, I understand, I visited Malaysia after flood disaster. They had a temporary housing. And even in Indonesia, nowadays, they have a step of temporary housing. And I would like to tell that when the Japan moved to this three-step recovery process, and it was 100 years ago. And this is the map showing that the area that now we around here. So that all the Tokyo were burned out by the big fire after 1923 Kanto earthquake. And we should work for the recovery. And this area was all burned out. Only the area remaining is Kanda, if you are interested in it. There's on one place. Here, this is this is Kanda. There is a very nice secret why that those area didn't burn. And we worked to reconstruct the housing 100 years ago. And this is how the emergency shelter was constructed. So now we are very near from Imperial Palace. You know, there is a Hibiya Park. Even in the Hibiya Park and around the Imperial Palace, there was an emergency shelter like that. So at that time, we did not have some special facility for emergency shelters. But after the Kanto earthquake, we worked very hard to have a emergency shelter we can use after the disaster. So this is the one elementary school. So in case of Japan, that we reconstructed or that we set up a very resilient, very safe elementary schools for emergency shelter. So nowadays, after the big disaster, we go to elementary school. This is a very nice custom or culture in Japan. And in case of, and in the process of the recovery from 1923 earthquake, we had the temporary housing. And title, the organization which destroy, which supply the temporary housing is Dojunkai. This is the very first housing quasi-governmental housing corporation who, which distribute that housing. And so our housing recovery or our public housing start from 1923. And at that time, we moved from the two-step to three steps. So we have a very long history. And after that, it was same, almost same age. The U.S. had the big earthquake in San Francisco. They also had the temporary housing, so that the U.S. and Japan was a similar situation. And after that, there was World War II, and nothing happened. And in the process of the recovery, we made those policies about housing recovery and the relief efforts to the government. And this one is the corresponding to this is the Disaster Act, and this act tells about emergency shelters and temporary housing supplies. And this is in a recovery phase. And we also set up a new code or the new act relating to housing. This is not only for the housing after natural disaster. This is more comprehensive housing policy. And after World War II, Japanese shortage of the housing unit was 2 million. So the Japanese government worked very hard to supply the housing to those who need. And why that the schemes to make a safer housing? This is the building code. So our building code was firstly established in 1919, before a Kanto earthquake. And but it stopped for a while. And now we have a new one, 1950s. And also we set up the loan or the mortgage systems for middle income people. And this is also 1950. And 1 year after we set up the Public Housing Act, the target of public housing in Japan is low-income people. So this is one. And in addition to that, 1955, we set up a quasi-governmental housing corporation. And the target of their support, housing supply, is middle class. So it's a kind of the comprehensive scheme for housing supplies in usual situation, but it really works to the reconstruction after natural disaster. So as Luis told, that the building back better is very important. So every after natural disaster, we we change the building code corresponding, reflecting the lesson we learned from the damage from the natural disasters. And Japan Housing Loan Corporation usually set up a low-interest housing loan for victims. And still, we are, our national government, constructing the housing for those who lost their home and they really cannot afford to reconstruct their home by themselves. And Japan Housing Corporation, now they changed the name, but still they really supporting the recovery project. So I can say that we could set up the framework of housing recovery during 1950s, and we still continue to use that. But fortunately, during the recovery process from the World War II, we didn't have the big earthquake, but we had one 30 years ago, 1995 Kobe earthquake. And we have experienced that those collapse of the building and the big fires. But actually, we didn't amend the building codes at that time. It means that we changed the building code, but that the if that the building which comply to the 1980s, the building didn't collapse, so we didn't change the code itself, but we are not good at that implement the building code, so that the number of the building which comply the updated building code was only 20-30%. So that is why that we had those kinds of damage. So the things we did after 1994 that we set up a new scheme to implement that our very nice building code. That is what we did. And yes, and as I told, we set up our basic framework of the housing reconstruction in 1950s, but the growing economy, the situation of the society has a little bit changed. And what we did for the 1995, complying to 1995 Kobe earthquake situation, we say that all the people can get the temporary housing if you want. But before, the target of temporary housing was very low income people, those who don't, anyway. And also, we set up a new scheme giving the money to the people who lost their home. So it's a kind of very unique one. We have a national earthquake insurance system, but those who had the national earthquake insurance in Kobe was very low, only 20% like that. Many people complain that there is no support from national government, and the national government say that we will have a new policy or a new act to support the people who lost their home. And now we will pay maximum 3 million yen for those who lost their home. And as I explained, that we did some minor building code compliance. And this is what we did for the temporary housing supply. So what I would like to say that the comprehensive framework of housing recovery is very important. So people really say that we really needed our temporary housing at the place we lived. This area was the area those who lost their home were lived. So the people really want their home at that place, but the government say, no. We cannot comply. We cannot supply the temporary housing at that place. It is because that if we use those places for temporary housing, the permanent housing should move to the suburb. So to avoid those kind of things, all the temporary housing were constructed in the suburb, and they completed all the public housing supply within 5 years. After 5 years, people could come back to their original location downtown. So, okay. Those kinds of the comprehensive management of the housing recovery is very important. And this is how it was constructed. And this is about, and during the process of the housing recovery in 1995, Japan moving to what I should say, the major part of the people, the elderly people here was one of the critical issues for the housing supply. Maybe Tsukuda sensei next year will explain more detail, but we start to think about the person with special needs, and also the community care was also important. And it is very interesting. So we constructed almost 50,000 temporary housing, and we used that for 5 years. And what we did after that, so we exported several those temporary housing to the country which had the earthquake disaster like Turkey and Taiwan. I don't think it really was effective, but a kind of the nice way to tell our experience that their cost is huge. So that maybe they have better bought that home at their country, but we did that. And this is what we did after 5 years. And after 5 years, we have several earthquakes, and what we did corresponding to the request from the recovery of each places. And this is what we did for 2004 Niigata. This is the public housing. And usual public housing in Japan looks like that. But in a rural area, they don't need those kind of things. And we supply those nicely looking temporary housing. And also about 2011 events, Professor Tsukuda will explain. And after that, we had 2016. And what we did, nowadays, the cost of the temporary housing is huge. Even one unit costs 10 million yen. It means that how much US dollars? I don't know. Anyway, so it's very expensive. Yuchi-san, can you? 70,000? Okay, 70,000 US dollars. So Luis is say that for the permanent housing, it's only costs 30,000. But for the temporary, in Japan, for the temporary housing, it costs 70,000. So why don't we use that for permanent? So nowadays, we try to convert those temporary housing to permanent one, but that it doesn't follow to our code of public housing. So we can't say this is a public housing, but that anyway, we are working hard to try to continually using the temporary housing for as a permanent housing. And also, we should now very serious to adapt to the population age. So even though we construct a very nice public housing for the victim, no one succeed those housing. It means that only the elder people live in public housing, and after they passing away, no one interested in using those housing. So now we try to convert this property to the owner who lived in that public housing. This is the one new trials in Japan that how we manage those public housing. Thank you very much. This is our 100 years experience of the housing recovery in Japan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Maki, for sharing the 100 years history in 15 minutes. So, yeah. And then, as Professor Maki said, the Tohoku University one will be really discussed and presented by the next presenter, who is the Professor Haruka Tsukuda from Tohoku University. So, Professor Tsukuda, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, Mr. Kawasoe. Thank you for this opportunity. First, let me give a short introduction about myself. My specialty is architecture. Especially, I am interested in planning and programming actual architecture. I came to Tohoku University in Sendai in 2012. It is the next year of the Great East Japan earthquake. I worked to support the planning of disaster public housing in several local governments and continue to research them after their construction. I would like to share some of my knowledge from the Great East Japan earthquake experience. By GJ and tsunami, approximately 350,000 homes were damaged in the 3 prefectures in Iwate, Miyagi, and Fukushima. As a result, 20,000 housing lots and 30,000 public housing units were built through public development. In addition, victims themselves are rebuilding their homes with subsidies from local governments. Usually in Japan, after disaster, the living environment of disaster victims changes from evacuation shelters to temporary housing to permanent housing. It is already Professor Maki said. One of the main types of permanent housing provided by the public sector is disaster public housing. This is a government project that was used to rebuild residential areas after Great East Japan earthquake. Most of the project utilizes existing programs in Japan. And after Great East Japan earthquake, mainly 4 choices of housing reconstruction, the national government decided not to build new houses in the newly established disaster hazard area by municipalities. Victims choose to rebuild their homes according to the damage to their land and houses. First type is rebuild their house at original location. Second type is rebuilding in another location. Victims acquire new land for construction outside the disaster hazard area. 2 of choices were reconstruction, higher ground or inland, and disaster public housing. And this basic planning was done by the local government. To carry out these projects, land development and construction of seawalls were carried out, taking into consideration the typographical characteristic of each region. This picture is cross-sectional image about 8 regions. Red line indicates disaster hazard areas where new housing cannot be built. Dark blue indicates public housing for disaster victims. Sorry. Sorry. So this is a cross-sectional image. To carry out these projects, land development and construction of seawalls were carried out. So this is a 8 cities cross-sectional image about reconstruction work. So red line is a disaster hazard area. And this is a seawalls. Some municipalities made the multiple seawalls, and sorry. Yes, and the dark blue is the public housing. So after Great Earthquake Japan earthquake, making use of extinct systems, each local government considered the reconstruction methods appropriate for their area. So I would like to talk about the solution to these 3 points in housing reconstruction. And especially, I would like to focus on disaster public housing. First, about the local needs and the characteristics and information acquisition by victims. I would like to introduce 3 topics from examples. So this is a timeline for construction of public housing. In order to plan a building, local governments are required to decide the location and the number of housing units to be built, and select designers and contractors. So they use the multiple questionnaires. Sorry. Here. Questionnaires, surveys and interviews of victims. This was done while they are living in temporary housing. This is a temporary housing time, evacuation shelter time. So after that, so public housing time. About grasping of the victim's intention, I'd like to use Ishinomaki as an example. Ishinomaki City was the municipality that suffered the most damage to its housing. A huge amount of public housing was built compared to the population. This showed a change in the desired public housing locations of disaster victims. On left side, sorry. This is a changing intention. So left side is so their living site. Right side is their intention for public housing location. So their designer to survey and so final decision of occupancy. The particular locations, the number and the location of the houses were decided based on the wishes of the victims. But as time passed, the number of people who wanted to return to their original area. First, they want to the safety inside the area, but they want to they changed their intention, come back to the their original area. So also only about 60% of the houses planned for the construction were occupied. So next we look at the example of the small municipalities, Chigahama Town in Miyagi Prefecture. Local government held information sessions for residents and conducted multiple individual face-to-face surveys. At that time, the government presented to each affected household with the price they would have to pay for their home in the future. encouraging them to make appropriate decisions. This enabled them to grasp the true needs with a high degree of accuracy. So to summarize, first, residents' intentions for reconstruction change. In Japan, the number of homes to be built is decided while understanding the wishes of disaster victims. But it is important to make plans that anticipate changes, especially the time of occupancy is the peak of the demand. The number of housing units required must be carefully examined from the perspective of stock management, including existing public housing. Large-scale municipalities formulate plans in anticipation of changing demographics. It is also effective to supply units in several stages, allowing for a review of the number of units. Small municipalities can optimize the scale of public projects by providing individual information and conducting face-to-face interviews to encourage appropriate reconstruction method. Providing appropriate information and supporting is also important for the social vulnerable who end up remaining in temporary housing. Disaster case management was carried out by municipalities team in Sendai and Ishinomaki. I would like to talk about community-friendly planning next. One of the characteristics of the disaster-stricken area in Tohoku is the traditional fishermen's homes and their multi-generational household livelihood remained. Furthermore, the Tohoku region has been depopulating and aging since before the earthquake. It was said that it was the future of the whole of Japan 10 years ahead. The building plan was designed with community-friendly, taking into account the aging situation and the lessons learned from the more than 1,000 people who died alone after the Great Hanshin Awaji earthquake, and also taking into consideration cooperation with the local comprehensive care system being promoted by the government. From here on, I will introduce some examples. This is an example from Tagajo City. A large housing complex was divided into several residential buildings, and assembly rooms were set up at the junctions of the pedestrian deck. Each building's community room. This is a detached house type public housing with common terrace in Tamaura, Iwanuma town. 6 villages relocated inland because here is a Sendai plain area. They are built with private houses. They are detached houses familiar to fisherman's house in village in Kamaishi. This is a small fisherman village. Next is a front access housing. It was proposed as a type of housing that would make it easy to talk to neighbors on a daily basis, and they suited the lifestyle that existed up to the point too. We plan believe that elder people in particular will be able to live without feeling lonely. Especially in order to communicate to the local government's concept to the designers, Kamaishi City made a design guideline for planning appliers. Of course, during the actual design stage, local government staff and architects receive input from potential residents and make adjustments accordingly. The following 2 special cases. In Minami Sanriku-town, a plan was made to build a welfare facility to the disaster public housing complex on high ground to support the lives of the elderly residents. So this is public housing area. So here is location of the welfare building. Residents can continue to live while receiving care even at the end of life. So finally, there are collective house type homes to allow elderly people to support each other. A total of 8 buildings were constructed in Fukushima and Miyagi. I talked a little bit about appropriate resource utilization through construction order method. After 2013, construction cost rose as orders started to be planned to stimulate necessary. Furthermore, the divergence from the standard unit price for public construction work occurred. A number of construction tenders were unsuccessful because normal ordering methods make rapid construction impossible. Variety of ordering methods were adapted. Public ordering system in normal time is direct ordering system. Here are the 3 methods that were adapted. This is prefecture agency system. This is a way the prefecture took over ordering and management to make up for the manpower shortage of municipalities. Next is purchase method, a method in which houses selected through competition and constructed purchases. The scope of companies that could participate in the competition was widened, including by allowing steel frame construction. House manufacturers that had no experience with public housing but had spare introduction capacity participated. That is the council method. In order to comply with the purchase system, local construction companies from the council were multiple companies and traders to build public housing. Moreover, depending on the local conditions and the timing of construction, the most appropriate structure and materials were selected from several options. This is conclusion of my presentation. The housing reconstruction following the Great Japan earthquake mobilized all of the existing systems. On the other hand, due to the aging of the population and the changing in the economic situation, there was something that were difficult to deal with under the existing system. These were addressed by various new ideas, such as disaster case management, architecture planning, and adapting of various ordering methods. However, they are changing in providing ongoing support for the more socially vulnerable victims. Furthermore, shortcomings in the existing system will need to be addressed in the future. This is all for my presentation. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Tsukuda, for your presentations. I understand lots of challenges, but also innovations by deep dive into the experience from Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. So the final presenter before the break is Professor Yuichi Kanako, also from Tohoku University. She will talk about the resilient housing reconstruction, the housing reconstruction and collaborative decision making. So please welcome Professor Yuichi.
Thank you for the introduction, Hiro. Thank you very much for this opportunity for me to be here today. And I would like to say one thing. In your program, it said collective decision making, but I wanted to make it collaborative for this presentation. And I'm actually very impressed with the presentation by Professor Maki and then also Tsukuda-san. And also, we didn't really talk beforehand what the presentation going to be, but I see a lot of links. And so hopefully that you can link what they have said to what I am trying to cover in this talk. And it's another layer more about collaborative decision making, how it is important in housing reconstruction for resilience. Just move on forward, please. Thank you. So, so when it comes to housing reconstruction, residents have to make decisions after decisions after decisions. And this is according to the model of Professor Markey, it's three-step reconstruction. And so what it means is, for instance, if you experience disaster, you have to decide whether you want to stay in where you've been affected, or you will decide you want to be displaced to go into the evacuation shelters. And then so if you get displaced, then you have to think about where you'll be going after that, whether you want to be in long-term, relocate to other place, or you want to return. And if you decide to relocate in the long term, then you will be making a more detailed decision for the permanent housing to relocate collectively with your neighbors, or you want to relocate independently by yourself. Or if you decide to return to your original place after going to the temporary evacuation shelters, then you want to think about whether you want to return adjacent to the original place, or if you want to be in exactly the same place. And all these really relates to other factors, something like hazard. The place where you used to live could be very dangerous, so you don't want to live there anymore. Or other community relationship, whether if you want to be in the community, and then also the housing supports that's been provided by the government or the other actors also matters. And so all decisions are really, have all these factors play into the decision, and residents have to make decision one after another. I think I have a little problem with the slide. Did you go one forward? And also the other things that I want to mention is that residents' life priorities change in the rebuilding process. So in the initial stage, so, I just don't know how to use them. And so at the initial stage, people are maybe about the time when they are in the evacuation center, they want their priority or their thought is that they want to rebuild quickly. They want to live, rebuild in place where they have less hazard. And that's really understandable because they still remember the experience from the hazard. So they want to be away and rebuild quickly. But then in the interim phase, for example, if they are in the temporary housing, they will be starting to think about how to reestablish life. And then also another factor coming in is the financial concern because they need to survive every day. And so the concern is about reestablishing life. And then after that, later in the phase, probably around the permanent housing phase, and then after being in the permanent housing, they do really want to start thinking about how to improve their quality of life, and then also improve the financial situation so that they could live better. And so we know by feeling that this happens, but it's really hard to be incorporated in the actual housing rebuilding. Okay, okay, have to do it quick. All right, thank you. And so when you have to make decisions one after another in a changing environment, the question is, how can we ensure good decisions in the evolving process? And so I would like to share one example from Tohoku in the Great East Japan earthquake recovery. And this is a community called Nobiru and Notono that is in Higashi Matsushima City, which is about 20 kilometers or 30 from Sendai. And what happened was that after the Great East Japan earthquake, their communities were inundated with the tsunami. So they have decided to relocate to the higher ground. And basically, in summary, what was happening there was that it was resident-centered rebuilding. And the reason why they were able to do it was that because they had the Machizukuri Committee, which is translated like Community Development Committee, and which existed prior to the earthquake. And so that having that in place, people were able to share their thoughts of what they want to do, and then came up with some of the ideas of what they wanted to reflect in the housing reconstruction. And then also with that committee in place, they were able to connect between the city government and then also maybe the national government to the residents. So it was very good in a way that they could achieve collaborative and transparent designing process. And not only the actors that was the city government and resident, but there are other actors like governments and also private sector actors like corporates, also universities. All these were in this area trying to think about what's the good solution for reconstruction for these communities. Okay. And what's interesting is that what is happening right now. Basically, 10 years later, all the housing constructions were done. First, the public housing were completed about in 6 years. And then after that, some of the houses that were built on the land that was given to the affected area and who had to construct the houses on top of the land have finished the construction in 10 years. So all the residential buildings were finished in about 10 years. But after that, what happened was that communities continue to develop to make it in a place that's more of the higher quality, that are more making them happier. For instance, there's multi-purpose facilities where they have hospital, but it's not the hospital for cure, but the hospital to prevent sickness. And then also have hotels that people can come in and stay with them. And so they came up with this idea. And then also there's like a micro community concept where you can have cafe, beers, and residents in a really sophisticated design. But it was because that they had the idea and they were able to reach out to the private sector as well, so that it have came into the actual physical form. Now, the reasons of why it has been successful has been that the resident was at the heart of the housing project, and it was one of which was the functional Machizukuri Committee, which existed, enabled transparent information sharing among all the participants or the stakeholders of this community redevelopment. And they were able to come up with collaborative decisions. And then also they were really closely connected. Sometimes even if you know everybody, there are times that you can't really talk to each other of what you think. But here, people were not afraid to talk. Doesn't really matter whether you're older or younger or gender, it didn't really matter, very inclusive. And we're also able to talk to their partners like governments and companies. And so basically having community have the idea of what they want to have in their reconstruction of their communities, the partners were able to provide assistance or the support that aligns to their needs. We often talk about the pre-disaster housing or recovery plans, but this area did not have that. But residents and the communities evolved to make their best decisions. And that evolving system of the communities that enable to adapt to the changing needs of the community as well as the reconstruction of houses. Now, this kind of case, is this unique to other countries? Actually not. I want to introduce one case from the Philippines that was affected by the Typhoon Haiyan in 2013. And they have decided to resettle low-income residents who were living along the coast to the inland. But it was really complicated because it had involved various stakeholders, not only about those members who were involved in the Japanese community rebuilding, but here we had international agencies, we had NGOs, also church, and all different actors. But 10 years later, there are some communities that have rebuilt with higher satisfaction, and there are some communities that have built without much satisfaction. And the satisfied communities, based on the 10-year survey, is that they had participated collectively in the design and the procurement processes. And they have fostered ties, they have learned how to collaborate, how to talk with other members of the community to make decisions together. And also they have received in-kind support to learn about how to do the bookkeeping, how to have loans, to have the house, which they had no idea beforehand because they are coming from the low income communities and they didn't even have land tenure before the typhoon. And so with all the processes and the lessons that they were given and learned, they built confidence and they wanted to continue improving their communities as well as the houses. And also the land ownership that really, really helped, which they didn't really think of having one before the disaster, but in the process, they were able to have it through their efforts. So that really worked. Rebuilt housing in other communities is not very, maybe not very appealing without stakeholder interactions. And there are cases actually where houses were massively produced and construction had to be accelerated due to meet the time. And it was basically dumped into the field by having just the construction to be finished. But it actually did not make the houses to be finished. And currently there are a lot of vacant units. The construction is not done. There's no communication among the residents. And also there's no living, better improved living condition. And again, in those kind of communities, they didn't have the resident participation and they didn't really have the opportunity to collaborate and communicate with others. So I think I'm finishing a little early, but this is my slide, last slide. Key factors to resilient housing reconstruction is that we need to have a holistic approach. We believe that, I believe that having a physical, stronger, more robust housing reconstruction is really important. But at the same time, the social and livelihood redevelopment needs to be attached to it. And also, it's really important to have the collaborative process. And I know it's really complicated, it takes time, but it needs, I believe it's really important to have that process so that the residents will be able to share what they need because they are the ones that they will be living after the houses are completed. And then also the priorities shift over time. In year one, earlier said they residents want to be away from the hazard, but then later on it's about financial stability, for instance. So it changed. So it's really important to have a consensus from time to time in the process of housing recovery. And it's not only about residents, it's also about the agencies and then the government who are giving hands to them so that collaboratively make best decisions for all. So this is my last slide, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor, which I think you just finished on time. Yeah. So we will have like the 15 minutes break from now, so we can come back here at 3:40. So for those connecting online, it's like 15 minutes from now in your time. And then after the break, we will have the panel discussion with all the presenters. And then we also have the Q&A sessions. For those connecting online, like you can ask questions by typing in the webinar. Please include your names and organization and the questions there so that we can recognize you. So thank you. So welcome back, everyone. And for those connecting online, like we are just starting now. So we will now move on to our panel discussion. So I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, Niels Holm Nielsen, who is the practice manager at the World Bank. Joining him on the panel are our distinguished speakers, Mr. Ruiz, Professor Maki, Professor Tsukuda, and Professor Iuchi. So I would like to give the floor to Mr. Niels to moderate the sessions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hiro. And thanks a lot for the inspiring and interesting presentations to all of you. In the context of rethinking success in housing reconstruction, Professor Yuchi, since you worked in both Japan and other countries, what aspects do you find important to measure success in housing reconstruction?
Okay, good. I think I want to comment on two things. One is that I think vibrant communities with high occupancy rates, and then some of the changes that's been done from the original communities. Those are something that I would like to see in the how successful housing reconstruction. And that's because if it's vibrant, it means there are activities that's going on in the communities. And if it's less vacancy, that means people stay in that place. That means that they are satisfied with where they are. And if I see the modification of the houses, that means there's effort to be adapting into the new environment. And so that means people are talking, people are trying to make their living better. And so I think that's one of the aspects that I would like to see. And then the other thing that I would like to mention is it's very basic, but I would like to have the houses more robust and safe, meaning that the houses could be maybe a little bit more stronger, or have at least thought about the potential hazard that they could face in the future. Because often in cases where people, for example, get relocated to other place, and then they maybe from the storm surge, and then they face flooding after they relocated into new location, and that's really sad to see. So I think those are the two things that I want to mention.
Thank you very much. Luis, from your work at the World Bank, what do you think are the most overlooked aspects of what makes a housing reconstruction successful?
From the portfolio review that I showed you before, there are a couple of lessons that are that pointed us in the direction of what should we be looking at in future reconstruction efforts. The first one was let's think about the most successful reconstruction projects, right? So we found a couple of them highly satisfactory. That's the rating we have at the World Bank, and there were two characteristics. Most of them were a long time ago, but there was one recent one, and actually it was not a reconstruction project, but it considered a reconstruction project because it after the disaster occurred in 2018, the earthquake occurred in 2018 in Indonesia in central Sulawesi. The project had a CERC clause, so and then immediately was able to rebuild. So it was a national slum upgrading project. A project that was built on 5 decades of previous engagement on urban infrastructure in Indonesia between the World Bank. So it has very, very granular community-based approach to planning, decision about the infrastructure to be built. And so the moment the disaster hit the country, even though they didn't have that many sites in the area, in Palu, what happened immediately was that they applied exactly what they had there to channel the funds, to work with the same methodology. So all this to say that the best reconstruction project is the one you don't need to prepare the day after. It's the one that already exists. No? And so this is one of the reasons why we are thinking that we should have more of those. And I would say that another overlooked factor is regarding what we measure. Many projects measure just the units built, and as you were just mentioning in your presentation, it's important that they are occupied and that people are happy living there. And if you only measure units built, you don't care about the location, you don't care about the infrastructure, you don't care about the amenities, no? And I would say the other thing that could make future housing reconstruction projects more successful is having some of the difficult conversations that usually take place the morning after the disaster, and that are typically the trade-offs, right? So, for example, we were discussing in the presentation before on-site reconstruction versus resettlement, temporary versus permanent. Is it going to be nationally led or local government led? How are we gonna choose the beneficiaries? And all these difficult conversations, there are different answers, and depending on the type of government you have, a little bit more left wing, right wing, they're gonna make different decisions. But having the conversation beforehand, that would help a lot. And I think in our role as the World Bank, we could guide that conversation with the clients beforehand, because we are in constantly dialogue with them about different initiatives. That's all from me. Over to you.
Thank you, Luis. Professor Maki, looking at Japan's century of experience, how has the idea of successful housing reconstruction evolved, and what can we learn from maybe less successful cases?
Okay, it's a very difficult question. So the definition of successful is very difficult to fix. And but according to my understanding, if the project which was constructed after the natural disaster could be used for longer time, I should say it is sustainable. I think it's very important. So, for example, the public housing constructed after Kobe earthquake, it was 30 years ago. they are still existing, but those who live in that housing is not those who lost their home. So several people passed away and several people moved out from their home. And people who really need the home newly entered that housing. So in that sense, the public housing which was constructed 30 years ago is no longer the housing for victims from natural disaster. So it is very difficult to say that how we, yes, like that. So the very important thing is that those housing, even though it was constructed for or after natural disaster, it should be comply to the updated present housing policy. If not, that it's just for the recovery project, it doesn't. We cannot use those kind of the housing for a longer time. So that I say that in 1950s, Japan set up the housing policies, and even reconstruction housing is constructed based on those policies. So the compliance of the or the adapting the. So maybe I should say that we should even reconstruction housing should be followed to the present housing policy. So, and from those kinds of viewpoints, the public housing is a kind of the nice kickoff to move to new policies. So, after the public housing after 1995 was a very nice kickoff for the housing for elderly people. So before that the public housing are not so much interested in the elderly people, but that those housing we are very much interested in supplying the housing for the elderly people. So I can say that I'm not so good at summarizing that. Anyway, so that should be stay with the housing policy is very important thing.
Thank you very much. And I think that's a good segue to the next question to Professor Tsukuda. In Tohoku and Noto, what overlooked social or demographic issues do you think have shaped the outcomes of success in housing reconstruction?
あ、正確にご回答したいので、私は日本語で失礼します。Sorryです。ですね、非常に成功っていうのは難しいなと、先ほど牧先生おっしゃいましたけれども、思っています。で、やっぱり、高齢化と人口減っていうのは非常に大きなファクターで、特に日本でもそうですし、世界でも先例がない状況の中で、新しいこともやるしかないっていうことが非常に重要な状況だったのかなと思います。そのためのチャレンジをすると。で、東日本大震災の時は、それを地方自治体ですね、マニシパリティーズが、選択する。で、それに国が交付金という形で強いお金のバックアップをするっていうことが新しいことをチャレンジする結果になったかなと思います。で、成功というわけではないですが、なんとなくこう状況が頑張ってチャレンジしたところとチャレンジしてないところでは変わってきているのかなと思っていまして、やっぱり従来型のニーズだけを反映して、今日もお話ししましたけれども、ニーズのピークが入居時にあるっていうところを考慮できずに、反映できずに、たくさん作ってしまったところは、やはり空き家が増えていったりとか、自治会の高齢化が進んでいて、コミュニティが崩壊してきたりしてきつつあるところっていうのもあります。で一方で新しいチャレンジをするっていうところでは、まだうまくコミュニティ作りがされている。先ほどゆうち先生からもありましたけど、やっぱりこのコミュニティがキーで、やっぱりハードを作っても、誰がこれをマネージメントし続けるのか、当初だけではなく、ずっとそれをキープしていくのかっていうのが、すごく大事かなと思います。で、こういう知見はあるんですが、一方で能登は、これがうまくまた活かせるかっていうと、ちょっと難しいなというのも思っていて、それは東日本と違って、やっぱりちょっとお金的なバックアップがなかったりとか、より高齢化が進んでいて、すでにもう 40%
超える高齢化率の自治体が多いので、そういう中でどうするかっていうのは、東日本よりより強い新しいチャレンジをしなければいけないのかなというふうに思っています。
Thank you very much. And following maybe a bit up on that, could you speak to Professor Tsukuda? Could you kindly speak to what specific difficulties have older residents faced when trying to rebuild homes and their lives after disasters? And any ideas you have of what could make these reconstruction processes more inclusive and supportive?
日本では高齢者が再建するときに難しいのは、やはりローンを組めない、住宅を、再建するためのローンを組めないということが一つ大きな、状況かなと思います。もう一つは、長らくですね、賃貸住宅に入るのも高齢者は非常に難しかったということで、そうすると災害公営住宅っていう選択肢しかなくなるんですが、災害公営住宅自身は、そのマネジメントっていうのは住民同士がやるので、高齢者だけでやるってことはすごく難しいって、先ほど言ったことでもあるんですけれども、なので、いろんなステークホルダーの人たち、ケアの人たちとか、弁護士さんとか、サポートできる人たちとできるだけつながり合っていくっていうのが非常に大事かなと思っております。で、高齢化の問題がもう一つは、能登もそうなんですけれども、やはり家族、子どもたちが一緒に住んでない、近くに住んでないっていうのは、日本の地方の大きな問題で、そのために本来は自分で自宅を作りたい、再建したいんだけれども、これが子どもたちの負債になってしまうのであれば、再建せずに、伝統的な住宅も壊してしまう。私たちは公営住宅に入って、元のコミュニティから離れて住もうとか、そういう選択肢をしてしまうんですね。だからそこをなんかうまく、子どもたちとのコミュニケーション、あとは周りの地域での支え合いみたいなことを、日本はすごく今個人主義がずっと進んでるんですけれども、もう一度日本の持っていたそういう、強さみたいなことは我々も考え直さなきゃいけないかなと思っています。
Thank you very much. Professor Maki, how has the role of local communities evolved in Japan's housing recovery, and how might those lessons apply to other countries?
Okay, so as Yuchi-san told that there is a three selections of the housing recovery. If I lost my home, why that I just buy my new home at somewhere else, or work with the project? It means that if that my home was located, my location was set as a buffer zone, I should move to the higher ground. I can join the project, or moving to the public housing. So those who can do by themselves, that the role of the community is very limited. But that from the questionnaire survey we did for the victims from the 2011 event, we could find out that the one groups which they really need the support, those and they live in the public housing, they lost somebody and they can recover by themselves from the mental illness, or those who really need the support from the community, so that the community really should support those people. And another thing that the importance of community, that I can select the buying my home at the other place, but that if I left those community, the sustainability of community would be lose. So it means that if possible, to maintain the community or to make the community sustainable, we really would like recruit those nice guys to our community, so that the leadership of the community is important, so that the housing recovery would work to to maintain that nicer community, or to make the community sustainable. And those kind of things would be used in it's the same as it's the thing Yuchi-san told, that the community recovery or community development type of the recovery would be very good, and those kind of things would be used in the other country.
Thank you. Luis, maybe you can build on that and offer a few examples of where community-driven approaches in housing recovery has led to both faster reconstruction and stronger long-term resilience.
Yeah, so community-driven participation, it's a concept like it's a bit like decentralization. So it can be a political statement, or it can, but once you pass from the statement to reality, you need to be prepared, right? And there is there in reconstruction processes when you involve more or less the community. And there have been a lot of stories of successes involving the community, and a lot of stories of failures, particularly when you don't involve the community, as we saw today. So a couple of examples of successful stories. One is related to land consolidation for post-disaster resettlement. We had after the earthquake we had in Palu, because we had they call it a triple disaster because it was an earthquake, it was a tsunami, and there was liquefaction. So you had to resettle, and you need to consolidate a large plot of land to move thousands of families. And there, of course, the question was, where can we locate safe land to do so? And one successful experience we had in the Central Sulawesi Rehabilitation and Reconstruction Project was that actually the community volunteered their land for the reconstruction. We had another case in which actually two companies actually were blocking the reconstruction process because of their interest, even though they had concession rights and they were not using them for decades, but still they were blocking that and wanted to be compensated, right? So you could see side to side the contrast and how community actually got together to do that. There was a second aspect. It's related to standardization in Indonesia, which is the freshest example I have in my head. They use an easy to assemble housing unit, which is called Risha, right? It's an earthquake resistant. It's a one-story house, and essentially it requires low-skilled workers that are adequately trained to build a housing unit. So you could see ideally the model is one in which you can employ local workers, so they have something to do. You train them, and then they will build. And typically, what happens is that families, you have your son, and some of in the same neighborhood, the young men work on this. But you had cases of people with disabilities or the elderly that did not have anyone. They just live there, the widow or the old man. And you see how the community organized to first of all, to locate the house in the right place. And second, to prioritize the construction of that particular person. And the last piece I would say is this community participation is about actually collaboration, right? In abstract terms, between the local government and the national government. And you need to be willing to collaborate and be prepared to do that and to manage the process, because in the community, they are not engineers, right? They don't know about reinforced masonry or the exposure of the housing unit, but they have a lot to contribute when it comes to how to recreate the conditions of this neighborhood. No? So, and for that, the governments cannot start doing it the morning after, and the national government cannot just bypass the local authorities, which are the ones that are in contact with the family. No, so this is like a physical condition. You need to be trained to do that. So you need to move from the political intention to the operational rules. How is it going to work in practice, and then to engage and to collaborate and to build this trust, because when you collaborate, you need to trust each other, right? That each other is doing the right thing and what they are supposed to do, and that they know what they're doing. And this is sometimes what blocks community participation. It's hard, but it's the right thing to do.
Thank you, Luis. Professor Yuchi, have you found any particular factor that seems to be critical for recovery strategies developed after disasters to effectively incorporate local community needs?
So most critical and often overlooked. Yeah.
You tell us, you're the specialist.
I well, I want to mention that disconnection between the level of governance, and it's not that that's anybody's fault. So what's been prepared at the national level, what's been prepared at the regional and local and community level is often not very connected. And I think in Japan, it's been very, over the past 20, 30 decades, things have improved, and there are a lot of laws that's been created at the national level supporting the, trying to support the communities. But often cases, the plan and the work that had to be done at each level of government or the groups is completed at their level. And for instance, in Tohoku recovery, for example, it was one of the greatest idea for the national government to be able to give support to the local government, that they were able to come up with some of the ideas how they wanted to be rebuilt. And it was a great intention. But then for the local government, the national government is some government that have a lot of power and then want to be perfect and then want to be, provide good, want to provide good administrative work, for example. So the intention, what was intended at the initially at the national level, had not necessarily been incorporated at the local level or vice versa. And so I think even though we have so many great laws and so great thoughts and then heart of what we want to rebuild better, the disconnection between the government or the communities are really key things that we want to think about. But I want to underscore that governance is such a rigid system, and it's really hard to make transformation in the process. And so what happened again in Tohoku is that like 15 years ago, we came up with a plan of how we want to recover. But then the needs of the residents and people and community have changed totally 10 years later. But then the government is not being able to respond to all of that change because of the rigidity or the structure that the government has. So it's something that I don't think that we can propose to change instantly, but I think we want to keep that in mind so that we could have a better effort to rebuild better.
Very good. And our final round of questions, it's the same question to all of you. Thinking forward, looking ahead, could you suggest one or a few critical steps that you think countries could take to build resilient housing capacity? And maybe we just do the line over, starting with you again. Then Luis gets a few extra minutes to think.
Right. So I think it's good to start from the local level or at the community level, because it's where we will be able to imagine what might happen if disaster happen. And so I would say simulation is really important. It doesn't have to be scientific simulation, but a simulation that to have an exercise even at the imagination, what might happen if different types of disaster happen, whether it's flood, whether earthquake, or what could affect the housing situation in that community or the local area. And then with that, we'll be able to know what needs to be done in prior, at least to be connected to maybe to the housing industries, or maybe to talk with the local government for support and what kind of support. And then from there, we can expand what needs to be done to be prepared for the potential disasters that might happen. So simulation, I think that would be good. Thanks, Stu.
私は建築の、sorry, ルイス建築の専門家なので、どうしてもやっぱり住宅をどう建てるか、建築をどう建てるかっていうのが一番関心が出てきます。そう考えたときに、今のマルチハザードの時代では、やっぱり誘致先生がおっしゃったように、イメージすることの前提としてですね、今までどういうふうにこの場所で、先人たちが、この地域をどう読んで、地形をどう読んで、気候をどう読んで、この材料を使って再建してきたかっていうのを改めて学ぶっていうことが大事かなと思います。で、近代以降ですね、技術の発達によって、何でも人間の力でやれるって信じてきたんですけれども、そうではないことに直面しているので、まずこの場所のポテンシャルっていうことを学ぶっていうことが大事かなと。で、もう一つは個人の力をもう少し、もう一回、レベルアップするっていうことが大事で、特に日本だと、かなりいろんなマーケットとか技術が進んできたので、家を作るっていうこと自体も専門特化してしまってるんですが、そうすると自分で修理をしたりとか、自分でこの洪水が起こって浸水した時にカビが発生したのを対処ができないとか、一番大事な構造材を切ってしまったりとかですね、そういうことが発生しています。なので、自分で何かできる力っていうのを普段から鍛えるということ。それは能登の復興では、自分たちで作るっていう活動が少しずつ始まっていたりもするので、邦画が見えるかなと思っています。最後に、自治体の中で優秀なスタッフを育てておくことっていうことは、平時から、やるべきことかなと思います。ちょうど今日仙台から東京に来るときに同僚の先生と話してたんですけれども、ノンテクニカルスキルっていう言葉を聞きまして、医療分野では、テクニカルスキル、医療とか看護とかってテクニカルスキルじゃなくて、ノンテクニカルスキル、組織をうまくオーガナイゼーションしていくようなスキルとか、ヒューマンスキルみたいなところがすごく、みんながチームで活動するためには大事ということで、特にその優秀な自治体の人材にはテクニカルなことだけではなくて、全体をオーガナイズするような、危機的状況でオーガナイズできるような状況、スキルっていうのを、平時から身につけるっていうのは、どこの国でも重要なことかなと思います。
Okay, so I would like to make my nice words by using 3 keywords. And the first one is that how resilient housing should be safer. As I explained, Japan continuously upgrading our building code, learning from the damage from the previous earthquake. So those kinds of making the housing safer is important. And the second was that at first I say that adaptation, but that maybe I have better make all the words start from S, so that sustainable. So it means that I really love the concept of the core housing in Indonesia. When they reconstruct the housing, they just give that core. It means that the toilet, bedroom, and kitchen. And based on their capability, they expanding their home. So those kinds of adaptability to the individual life stage is very important. So through those kinds of activity, that those housing would be sustainable. So that those sustainability that's very important when we think about the resilient housing, especially about the reconstruction housing. And the final word is the system. I think that, as I told, the housing supply after natural disaster is a nice opportunity to implement the new policy of housing. As I explained that after the 30 years ago, 1995 earthquake, we really accelerate that the policies for elderly people. And also very important things for the housing policy in especially developing country is that the loan or mortgage, how they can make the money to buy a new home. And in case of Japan loan, this is not a mortgage, just a loan. It's just covered by my life insurance. So if I died, I don't need to pay that. It's because the insurance company pays that. Anyway, those systems work with the building code compliance. So if I'd like to use the national housing law, I should follow to the building code. And I also love that the community mortgage in Philippines, about Indonesia. So it's really nice work, collaborative work within the community. They should take care of each other to maintain their nice community. If not, that the price of their home coming down. And if I cannot pay for that, she should pay my mortgage instead. So I think that those policies can be implemented at time after the natural disaster. Then those policies would be very popular. So I think that a safer, sustainable system would be is that my 3 keywords for resilient housing.
So it's hard to come at the end. Of course, I had more time, but then now it's harder to find how to add to this great comment. So I just want to share a little bit about what we have not put together in the report, but helped us think through the conclusion. So we interviewed around 45 colleagues at the bank that had done either housing or housing reconstruction projects. And so essentially combined, they had like more than 300 years of experience combined, right? So all of them multiple experience in the sector. And one of the most impactful statements we got from these interviews was one person saying, you know, we do a lot of this scenario planning with a little bit of an optimism bias. So we are thinking about how to densify the city, how to make it more livable, nice, with green spaces, and we are thinking about, you know, how can we attract the next unicorn startups and create this, and we spend quite important resources to do that, but we don't do the same thing for a reconstruction scenario. And so they were not suggesting just to move on one to the other, but at least don't allocate zero to that. No? And I think that's aligned with what you are saying. No? So this disaster imagination and scenario planning. We have also all sorts of tools to, for example, for mitigation, right? What if we build in this way, how many lower GHG emissions are going to have? But we rarely have tools that are strong for adaptation. And EFDR is starting to do that, but on the context of different hazards, and of course for housing reconstruction there is a space to do that, no? And so the key word is actually before, right? So plan, have the scenario planning. In terms of policies also, it was very interesting in your presentation when you say, well, these laws that we did in the 50s, we are still running we are still using them, right? Yeah. So can we see the regulatory framework in our client countries, so to make sure that they have that in place so they can respond? They don't need to contemplate $70,000 per unit housing unit, but according to their budget. So what is the type of institutional framework they need? And on that level of preparedness, so one attribute that is key is also flexibility, right? And this is one lesson that came from the reconstruction in Chile, where they operate every reconstruction through their Ministry of Housing, so through their standard programs, but they knew exactly which operational rules will operate differently when there's a disaster. So, for example, what are the number of approvals for housing projects? So instead of having 5 approvals, if it's post-disaster, it's only 2. What are the ceilings for land acquisition? What are the ceilings for certification of eligibility of beneficiaries and so on? So you have to be flexible, but you need to know what you can be flexible on. And I think those are keys that come from doing it before. We have not found a single country that didn't have capacity and had a great reconstruction effort afterwards. We have had countries that are very strong housing market that then did poorly in a reconstruction effort, but we have not found the other things. So this is important. So regarding the role of the government, and this is my last point, I think that for the future, the government needs to focus resources where they could be needed the most after a disaster. And there are 2 areas. So one is they need to embrace complexity. There are issues such as temporary housing that we discussed today. There are issues such as resettlement that are complex issues. But involving local governments, adjusting the national government regulation to the government local government framework, this is complex. So, but you need to embrace that complexity and see how you can do it. How you can have programs that can actually involve families in retrofitting their units, like it was mentioned before, right? So embrace complexity, and we try to avoid that, right? It's not we say we is governments and also institutions like the World Bank, right? We try to simplify so we can deliver and deploy and disperse. But it's the role of this type of national governments and or institutions to embrace complexity and invest in innovation, right? In the right innovation, because you need to have, for example, pre-vetted designs for housing reconstruction. If you don't have them, the morning after, it's going to be hard. These procurement rules, for example, procurement packages that you can actually decide to deploy after a disaster. I think those are the things that you need to invest again before it's too late. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, and thanks to all of you. Very insightful, inspiring. I think we may have a few questions. Back to you, Hiro.
I think we can open the questions from the floor. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand and also start by your name and organization. And if you have a specific question to someone, please also specify the name.
Yeah, thank you. Ishiwatari from Meiji University. My question is to Luis about the culture. Yeah, how can cultural aspects be integrated, included in housing reconstruction? As Maki Sensei or Tsukuda Sensei already mentioned, some cultural aspects are included in buildings in Japan. So in international assistance context, as far as I know, such a cultural aspects are not included in international assistance well. So how such aspects can be included?
Oh, this is a very, very difficult question. I would say that there are different layers. Like this is a little bit like an onion, right? And the first layer of the onion is that you find after a disaster is the policy orientation of the sitting government, which can be a game changer for whether you are, more to give incentives or to give direct support to families, right? That is already, and then in that part, there is also a bias towards being more nationally led, locally led. So those are this is the first level. And then, of course, once you go inside, you find some cultural preferences and that sometimes collide with what the ruling government actually think is the best, right? In the middle, you have all the bureaucracy that the laws and their processes, and that's where you need to. It's a balancing act, and it is. And when you do it the morning after, it's complicated because you have families that don't have a roof, don't have a door to close, and they don't have jobs. So it's a worst moment to have that conversation, right? So that's why you rarely get the community participation as much as you would like to have. When it comes about cultural preference, I think one of the things that we try to do, we have our environmental and social framework that guides us to incorporate the preference of the communities. I think one thing that has proven useful in the different projects, and this is what came out in our diagnostic, is to be able to show the families the trade-offs. And first of all, one very easy one is families don't want to live in apartments. They want to live in single-family houses. And that's actually the culture, right? So and then, well, if that's the case, then we need to deal with the commuting times that are going to come afterwards, because we cannot put single-family homes for everyone that needs it in a central location, right? Or if you want to do that, then we will need to have large investments in mass transit that you need to talk to the authorities and do that. So, and once you start having the conversation about the trade-offs, you start, seeing a little bit of light about how the solution could look like. Now, the problem is, in some of these conversations, not all of the stakeholders are represented, no? And that's a big mistake, and I think that's what was emphasized by all the presentations now, no? So, not easy, but it's even more complicated after a disaster. But it's, as always, it's good to have the conversation, right? And know that not everyone is gonna get its way. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Comment on that. Yeah, I know it was addressed to Luis, but I thought I would wanted to share some thing that I wanted to also, I wanted to include in the presentation today, but I didn't. And I'm sure Ishiwatari-san and Maki-san and Sukuda-san, everybody knows about this, but I think all of you here have heard about the Recompact program in Indonesia, which I really like. And I think it initially started with the World Bank idea after Aceh, and it didn't perfectly work in the beginning, but then it evolved to be a better system in Yogyakarta earthquake. And so the way how it works is that the residents are at the core, that they design the houses, and they also work in a small groups of families. And so they come up with design, and also have everybody participating have roles of being like a budget administrator, being the person who are connecting to the contractor. And so they work in a group. And the facilitators are actually dispatched from the Indonesian national government. And then those facilitators, through the experience from Aceh and then to Yogyakarta, they are more experienced. And then so they can provide better suggestions. And then also they have more networks. So they are able to incorporate what they have learned. And also the residents are the one who is responsible for designing and then continue living in that house even after it was completed. Unfortunately, Indonesia is not working with that system because it was basically funded from the international agencies, and now they have to be on their own. That is really hard to sustain that system. But I think that kind of framework is really important, and I think it's one of the unique and innovative system that we had. So I think the bank should think about having it back again.
Thank you very much. My name is Kiyoshi Murakami. I'm a senior advisor to the city of Rikuzen Tagara, which is the completely destroyed and wiped out of destroyed by the tsunami in 2011. I'm very, very happy to be here, and I'm very, very thankful to the member of GFDRR to organize these sessions. And this is a great opportunity to also to remind myself, and also great presentation by the distinguished presenters and inspiring and comprehensive presentation. Thank you very much. Now, as a practitioner of the being in a destroyed city, the reconstructing whole city, I was also struggling at the time to rebuild. Of course, the shelters to even the shelter itself, because there's no place to put the shelters in the case of the tsunami itself. And there was also a place that actually need to be rebuilt. That whole landscape is being basically gone. So you need to find out whose property is there. So who has that property rights to do that? We actually had a long discussion, and also I was fighting against the Japanese national government. Are you kidding? You're talking about that we have to have that all over the property rights people's signatures for each one of them to rebuild whole city. That's ridiculous things for the taking so much time. It took 2 years to do that. So that actually created the slowness of the building that whole city. So what my question to all of you presenters, probably anybody can talk about. I think it's I don't know if this is only Japan's, the specific issues, or maybe some other countries, maybe. But there's a number of the lessons learned from this, that property rights also very, very important. How are we going to deal with that? And also, I was actually really, proposing the Japanese diet to make the law changed. I was talking with them all the time, so that they didn't do it this time. But I think they should have done to change the law to be able to construct, even though there's no signatures from each property, and even under such a circumstance. I think the Japanese, the constitution probably said that's okay. Anyway, so I'd like to hear from you. What is your perspective on this? Thank you.
That's a hard one. Let me just start, and while my colleagues here also think a little bit about it, by saying that there are some functions. For example, where are we going to rebuild? No, that question always comes, and typically in the legal framework of countries, this function is given to local governments. So they say the local government shall provide land for the either resettlement or post-disaster reconstruction. Now, the question is, if this is their mandate, but when the disaster happens, if they have not done it once before, first of all, there is no one that knows how to do it in the municipality or in the city. And because sometimes you need to liaise with the national government needs to release the land, needs to transfer to the local government, and the local government needs to check if it can be serviced or not, if it's they don't have a special plan. I mean, all these things happening. So if you have not done that before, then you are having a huge problem. So I would say that this is one of the things that we have found, that you have a tendency when you do housing programs in general, not post-disaster, to try to focus on the nicest part of housing, right? So that's why you do more mortgage market, new high density. And then you don't do programs like the one that was mentioned before, like the Inspire. For example, Indonesia has Inspire in this Yogyakarta work. There is a home improvement subsidy, large home improvement subsidy scheme that operates through the facilitators. Facilitators go and do home improvement. Now, for a politician, it's not that nice to take a photo next to a house where the roof was improved rather than in front of a shiny, glass ceiling building in the city, right? So, and also the banks don't like that much, and the developers also don't like that much because they would rather build nice, bigger houses, higher value houses, right? So it is always governments need to try to keep these programs alive, work with local governments, work with the community. But if you don't have these programs beforehand, it's very hard to do it afterwards. And you see the impact immediately because then you see that the progress is very slow because there is no land. You have the materials, you have the budget, there's no land. Or you have unhappy communities because they have never been involved. And they all go to complain to the local government, and the local government says, well, I cannot help you because, we have not done it actually before. No? Thank you. Okay, you had enough time now. So you need to come up with something better.
Yeah, very, very difficult questions. And I completely agree to Luis' comments. And now in Japan, we do that the project we call that the pre-disaster recovery planning. It means that before we hit by disaster, we prepare for the recovery. And through those process, we usually say that we should pick the boundary of the land and we should clear that the who own this land. If not, that it will delay like that. So we try to do that, and but we should follow to the law of each country. And I'm very much interested in recovery project after 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami in Banda Aceh. I had chance to go visit that place. And the government gave the house to the resettlement site to the victims, and I'm very much interested in about how those housing are operated and transferred to the other guy. The land ownership belongs to still the government or the NPOs, and the house itself it's not so clear, but they are selling. I don't know how they do that, transferring the right to live there so that we can think about kind of the operational level of operation, how we can manage those right to live or right to use the land. So maybe we can think about those kind of things, but still in Japan, as you told, it's very tough work to deal with, and it's really delayed the recoveries. And I heard that the government cannot use the land which belong to the 2,000 people's ownership. So maybe we have better work for that.
私は先生方みたいに海外の事例はあんまり知らないんですけれども、東北の復興関わってた中で感じたことで、お答えしたいと思います。おっしゃる通り、やはり、たくさんの権利者、特に私有権がものすごく日本では大事にされるので、特に地方だと、森とかも解所的な感じで、コミュニティで価値を権利を持ってるって、それが、相続してないので、すごく芋づる式にたくさんの人が権利者になっているっていうのが、非常に問題だったかなと思っています。で、それって、被災地だけではなく、今の日本全体はこの土地所有の問題はものすごく大きくなっているし、建築の人からすると、土地所有への要求がものすごく日本人強すぎると言い過ぎかもしれないんですけれども、と思っているので、もしかするとここは制度的なもの、もう少し非常時には自治体に帰宅できるような、仕組みを作ると同時に日本人の土地に対する文化みたいな、これっていうのは家制度と結びついているのでものすごく難しいんですけれども、その辺をちょっと長期的にかけて、チェンジしていかなきゃいけないタイミングかなと思っています。完全に人口が減っていって、我々よりも、今の子供の世代になると、より持て余す土地がたくさん出てきてしまいますので、今から始めるっていうのは非常に大事かなと思っています。
So for the answering to the question, if the property right is also the same in the other countries. And I'm just talking from the Asian countries, especially the first example is from Indonesia in Palu after the 2018 earthquake and tsunami. And that area, actually, the one who had registered their land in prior to the earthquake was about 50%. And it's really connected with the ethnicity. The area Palu is very diverse area, and then the indigenous population is very proud of the way how they are living. And the way how they live with the land is also, like Tsukuda-san said, in the case of Japan, shared. And so it's not registered one by one. But when it comes to rebuilding, and especially when you are getting land or relocation, for instance, you have to show your proof of land, which is impossible for them. And so I see the gap between the modern land management system, which recovery programs are based on, versus the traditional way how people live and with the land. So that was very obvious in Indonesia, in Palu, Central Sulawesi. And the other thing that I thought was in the case of Philippines after Yolanda, in 2013, the way how the outsiders like NGOs or the government have provided their temporary housing and then also permanent housing would really affect the outcomes of whether you will get the land tenure easier or harder. And especially if the foreign organizations come in and then purchase the private land and then construct on that private land, is really complicated and cannot really be solved by the outsiders. So it needs to be coordinated with the local government and then also maybe the individuals, but they have to leave. And so sometimes it's left as is, that the property right is not given. And so there are variations of complications in having property rights, depending on who have been involved, who have been able to be connected to the one who can solve the problems. And so it's a complicated process. And I think also Japan, I'm sure that you have put a lot of effort, and thank you for asking the question.
Add one thing on this property right issue, because about the importance, another example of the importance of thinking it before is, for instance, after a disaster, you check if they have a property right. But what are we going to do with the renters? And some of them had informal rental arrangements, right? So are they eligible beneficiaries or not? And if we are going to incorporate, which type of benefit are we going to provide? And then the other thing is, it's not only the right about the housing unit. Sometimes in some of our developing countries, you have more than one family living in one single structure. So essentially, you can have 3 families living in one structure at collapse. So what are you going to do in the reconstruction? Are you going to provide housing solutions for the 3 families? Or are you going to replicate the overcrowding conditions before? I mean, all these things are something you can actually think through before. And then the last part is, if they don't have a property registry, I mean, if they don't have a cadastre, that's going to take a lot of time. Now, is it possible, and this is something that, for example, an institution like the World Bank could think of, is it possible to find a financial mechanism to warranty any potential compensation that could be caused by the need to speed up the reconstruction process, or should we really need to wait? Can we have like a sort of a financial instrument that becomes like a little bit of a time machine that we can actually do it faster while we resolve that it respects the rights of the owners? So that could be something that we could start thinking together, no? Thank you.
To Roy's comment. So in the rural area of Japan, the land ownership, it was a very tough issue. But at the time, that year, 1995 COVID earthquake, the recovery of the condo was very tough task. It's been that because that we need that the consensus of the older people. Our laws say that now the 3/4 of the agreement is necessary. You can see that those high-rise condo, that is the common ownership. How we can manage that the consensus building of recovery of that. And I had same story in Turkey. They had a big earthquake and they live in a condo and the ownership of the building the same. So I think it's like a culture. So we really had a very tough agreement of the land ownership, but that those highlights would be the next very tough struggles of the housing recovery, I think.
日本語でも良いので、あと、時間的には一つか二つほどですけども、if you have any question, you can ask also in Japanese or
Thank you so much. My name is Takuya Ito from Pacific Consultants. I'm working as a consultant. I'm working for the DRR planning in overseas. And my issue maybe go into the how the support from outside or including the private sector, how it can enhance the speed of the reconstruction. I think in Japan, we have a agreement with the private sector to provide the housing after, like a temporary housing after the disaster. So I think maybe this kind of pre-agreement maybe can be applied also in the global context, how the donors or the other outside international society can support the speedy reconstruction. So in this context, I would like to know if the Japanese experience of this kind of pre-agreement can be applied to the international, context of the supporting system. It just came into my mind. So if there's any insights, I would like to hear. Thank you so much.
So to the direct question, I don't know any of the examples that have applied, but I am pretty sure that the contractor or the private sector corporations that has been working on the regular development projects with that country already might be able to, because they have already have connection to the activity of the construction activities, they might have come and help in case of large scale disasters. Now for nationally, I'm not sure yet, but I am sure some of the countries start thinking about it. Philippines have been working pretty much on preparation, especially in terms for the Metro Manila disaster that might face. They've been working on it since 2004-ish. And so a lot of these agreements and ideas to be prepared and prior to disaster is actually taking place.
This is not from Japan to international world, but I heard that one private company who do the business in Indonesia, the reason why they do that they really would like to use that housing for temporary housing in Japan. So if they have the factory in Indonesia and they can make a house much cheaper than Japan, and they are thinking to bring those housing to Japan for temporary housing.
Collaboration part, that it's what happens after a disaster, everyone wants to help. So you have bilateral aid, you have the multilateral banks, and then you have NGOs, and you have a large need, but it's very hard to determine who's going to do what. And that is something that could be part of the scenario planning, right? So who's going to decide what? And if, for example, the case of Indonesia that was mentioned before, the good thing is they have now this region model. So we can at least agree that that's going to be the standard for the unit, right? But, we had just situation with our friends from the ADB that they had a project doing an important water treatment plant. And they were doing it, and at some point in time, we realized that no one was going to do the water connections. Like no one had thought, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to channel the water? And actually, everyone assumed that someone else was doing the connections. So and we had a road, the sidewalk, we had everything, and suddenly there were like 10,000 water connections missing, and it was because we lack a centralized planning at some point in time. And the thing is, plans change because someone is building units faster, depending on their processes and their procurement plans and all that. So someone needs to be on top of the things to organize. And a good way is to have a relatively defined process to manage all the help that is going to come, and have some standards, and rules to follow it, and who's going to be leading these discussions, and who's going to share with others what's needed, because it's not a problem of resources sometimes after disaster, it's a problem of organization. And if you don't have it, can be another disaster on the ground. Thank you.
Unless any more questions, I think we are actually on time to finish this the Q&A session, the panel discussion. So thank you so much again to all the panelists. And now, so to conclude today's seminar, I would like to invite Niels to provide the closing remarks.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you for joining us today, to the distinguished panelists for sharing your knowledge and your experience with us. We have a disaster risk management hub here in Tokyo. It's the team that's organizing this event today. Our main role is to connect the experience and the knowledge that Japan has on disaster risk management topics with the development challenges that we as an organization, as the World Bank Group, are asked by countries around the world to solve on a regular basis. There's lots of these development challenges that has to do with disaster risk management. As you have heard from Luis in particular, we frequently get asked to finance housing reconstruction. We are also frequently asked to finance housing more generally. We are frequently asked to finance all kinds of other things in the built environment. And we try to bring not only financing to solve some of those issues, but also knowledge that can help some of those governments solve the issues, hopefully in a better, higher quality, maybe faster way. When it comes to housing reconstruction, clearly Japan has hundreds of years of learning. And while I sense from the conversation here that those of you who are professional in the area can easily pinpoint that 10 or 15 or 20 things that you don't feel are quite working the right way yet. You are certainly in a position to ask questions from experience, and many of those questions are the same kind of questions we come across. And we come across them sometimes in countries that have not yet had hundreds of years of experience trying to resolve these questions. And therefore, there really is a basis to bring some of your collective experience to the world, and we're trying to do that. Just next month, we have 40-some people from 11 countries coming here for a week to focus on housing reconstruction. I imagine we will have them interact with some of you again And it's one of the ways that we are trying to make these knowledge connections between the Japanese experience and the world when it comes to disaster risk management. So I really appreciate that you all have taken the interest today to show up here and join us, contribute, participate. I appreciate the knowledge that you have already shared. It was interesting for me. I'm no housing expert. I learn something every time I listen in and have an opportunity to participate in this kind of conversations. And I hope it has been worth your time. And with that, I will say happy afternoon. Thanks for coming.